Welcome to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. I'm Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This show features questions from the Personality Hacker community that we answer in about 10 minutes. We've been using personality types in our coaching for years, and we'd love to answer your questions about personal growth through the lens of type. You can find out more about us at personalityhacker.com. Okay, now let's hear today's question.
Hi, Joel and Antonia. My name is Jay. I'm from Warsaw in the United States. My question is this. My behavior is INFP. My cognitive function is ENTP. At my core, I feel that I am an ENTP, but in social settings, my I and F functions take over. What are your thoughts about the relationship between behavior and cognitive function? Also, should one be used to influence the other, or should they be allowed to coexist naturally? Thank you.
Thanks, Jay, for the question. So you're showing behaviors of an INFP, self-reported, but you feel or you think you're an ENTP. Those are your preferences in the Myers-Briggs system. And so what is this all about? In social settings, my introversion, my feeling comes out. Am I really an ENTP? What's going on in social settings? How should I think about this, Joel and Antonia?
Yeah, this is an important question to create a distinction between behavior and type. So when Jay said that he thinks he's an ENTP or has ENTP cognitive functions, the first question I would have is, according to what? Like, what gave that diagnosis of ENTP cognitive functions? Was it an online test? Is it just that's what feels like a best fit type? Because those two things are very different. We, especially early on in our exploration of type, we have a tendency to hand a lot of power over to things like online tests. And that makes sense because that's our first diagnostic tool is to look for people who ostensibly know more than we do. And then they've set up these assessments, these online assessments. And then we go, okay, well, this person who knows more than I do, I'm going to trust that the process that they have to distill down what my preferences are, I'm going to trust that. And that makes sense. And that's not a terrible way to start. But if a person feels like they have ENTP cognitive function preferences, I would personally make sure that that is beyond maybe a tool, the keys to cognition test. That's a great assessment, but it's also not complete. So I would, I'd try to figure out where exactly are the ENTP cognitive functions coming from. The second thing is that there is absolutely a huge difference between behavior and type, meaning that behavior is more aligned with traits. And we tend to conflate personality type and personality traits all the time. But our behavior and our traits are emergence of an entire system running. One of the nodes in that system will be our cognitive functions or our cognition, but it's not the only component. Like, we are very impacted by our environment. We're not going to show up the same, even if we have the same cognitive function preferences. We're not going to show up the same if we come from completely different cultures, right? Different countries, speak different languages. And that gets pared down from the huge component of like a country's culture all the way down to, say, family culture. You'll have two different people or of the same type that will have very different behaviors because they had different parents and they had different paradigms that they grew up in. They had a different part of the world that they were, that they lived in. So, or were influenced by. So our behavior is definitely a different bird than our cognitive functions are.
This is why we've made a pretty clear distinction between what we call typing, looking at people's behavior in videos or friends and family from a distance, and speculating what their cognition might be, what their type preferences might be. We type people from a distance. A lot of people find fun in that. It's entertaining, it could be fun, but man, is it uncalibrated because those same behaviors don't always come from the same sources. And so in our profiler training program, our 6-month program, we spend a lot of time with students dealing exactly with this, Jay. We talk about what are the differences between behaviors and the wiring of the mind, and doing a lot of, role playing and workshopping on how to notice the difference between those two things. Because it's nuanced. It's more challenging than most people would make it seem online.
Right. And choices in your life are going to alter those in a huge way. Like I just profiled basically back to back, two ISTPs back to back. One of them is an athlete, and he's not a professional athlete, but he definitely loves sports. And so he's put himself in a context where he's almost constantly, doing some sort of athletic sport over and over again. And then I profiled an ISTP who is a doctor. And these two people were very different in how they showed up with behavior, and understandably so, because one had given a lot more permission to their extroverted sensing or sensation in both their work and in all of their hobbies, whereas the other ISTP had given a lot more preference to their introverted intuition or perspectives. And so their energy was different, and the things that they were interested in were different, but they had the same type preferences or cognitive function preferences. So I think it's important to understand that we can show up very differently even if we have the same functions. That said, let's go back to the specifics of ENTP cognitive functions versus INFP behavior socially. So ENTPs, all extroverts, I think, get this, I don't know, there's like this assumption. Yeah, this misnomer, this assumption that if you're an extrovert, you're going to show up in a very extroverted way in social environments. Now, I have ENTP preferences. I have those cognitive functions, and I don't show up that bombastically in a social environment. I tend to kind of hang back a little bit. One of the things that might influence that is that in the Enneagram, when you look at Enneagram instincts, I'm a sexual dominant. Sounds really bad if you don't know instincts, but 1-to-1 is my preferred instinct. My second is self-preservation, and my third, what's called your repressed instinct, is social. And so I have a social repressed instinct. Now that shows up in a variety of ways, but one of the things that shows up in is I'm not super comfortable when there's a huge group of people. Whereas, Joel, you're the opposite. You're social dominant.
Oh, yeah. The bigger the crowd, the better it is.
Exactly. So I'm going to show up way more engaged when I'm in a one-to-one context because of that instinct preference than I am if there's a huge group of people. One could argue, well, maybe that looks like I have more introverted tendencies in that moment. And in some ways I do. But it's not that I have introversion as a preference. It's that I have a one-to-one connection component that's a preference. I also very much get into my extroverted feeling or my harmony space when I'm engaged with another person, which makes sense because that extroverted feeling or harmony is all about the vibe between two people. It's about the energy and connection and observing the other person and their dynamic with you. So as an ENTP with, one-to-one or sexual instinct preferences, it makes sense that I'm going to hang back. I'm not social dominant. I'm social repressed. I'm going to hang back in a social situation. But if I do happen to find those one-to-one connections, I'm going to try to get into that extroverted feeling or harmony function with that other person because that's how I'm going to vibe with them initially. It's how I'm going to initially connect. But that doesn't mean I'm not also going to very much be looking for people that I can connect my intuition to as well. I also have extroverted intuition as an ENTP or exploration. That's going to be my preferred way of connecting with others. But since I'm connecting, that means I'm going to be in an extroverted space. So the two functions that are the most obvious are going to be my intuition and my feeling. Now, it doesn't take long to see my introverted thinking or accuracy show up because I tend to express myself in a very, introverted thinker sort of way.
Yeah.
I tend to be very assertive with my opinions. That said, that feeling component is probably going to show up first, though, because I'm going to connect first, and then I'm going to go to a more intimate space, which is the space that the introverted functions occupy. Because that's a bit of a philosophy of mine. We connect with our extroverted functions. We seek intimacy with our introverted functions. So that initial connection is going to show up more clearly with my intuition and my feeling, which are the preferences of an ENTP. So it all makes sense, right? Like if you're an ENTP and you're showing up more quote unquote quiet, or possibly one could say shy, you didn't say shy, but let's pretend you did, that could have explanations that have nothing to do with your Myers-Briggs cognitive functions that live outside of it. They're different nodes in that system. And it also makes sense if you have ENTP preferences that you would show up in a more feeler sort of way. It's not really about how you're showing up and behaving. It's about which functions you're pulling on in these situations. And so an INFP would not be pulling on extroverted feeling. They would be pulling on something else. They actually would be more likely to connect with people through their intuition directly, using extroverted intuition. And then second, with extroverted thinking, even though that's their 3-year-old or inferior function, that's also an extroverted function. So they're going to connect in that way as well. So an INFP's connection is going to look very different than an ENTP's connection. Although they'll both be the happiest if they can use their extroverted intuition or exploration, because that's a preference for both. So I would, if you're trying to figure out your type, if you're trying to figure out how your behavior and your type interact, just to pare it down, first of all, it doesn't matter what our functions are. We're going to show up the way that our whole system influences us to show up, meaning that our behavior is the emergent of an entire system running, where our functions are only one node in that system. It's just one thing that's influencing us. And second, your introversion, your feeling, all of that stuff could make sense with ENTP preferences if those other nodes in the system influence it that way. Or it could mean that you're an INFP, you have INFP preferences, and the ENTP part is coming from some other thing, right? Like that's a whole different, ball of wax. So I wouldn't use your behavior. I would use what do I lead with? What's my dominant function? What am I bringing to every situation? If extroverted intuition or exploration is that dominant function, it's the one tool that you think is going to solve all your problems, then you're leading with that. You're an ENP. And if you're supporting it by believing that truth needs to be said and expressed, and why is everybody so afraid to say what they really mean? And why can't we just take this down to a digital place? And it's very clear that introverted thinking or accuracy is a really strong component. If you're going through to a thinking place, well, then that would be your auxiliary or co-pilot. So yeah, that's probably how I would see that. And ultimately, behavior and functions have a relationship, but they're not a one-to-one correlation.
Thanks, Jay, for the question. You can ask your own question about personality types or personal growth. Visit personalityhacker.com/questions. We also have programs designed to help you with your personal growth through the lens of personality types. Again, visit personalityhacker.com and find the program that's made just for you. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. We'll talk with you on the next episode. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision-making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action-focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.